Hi, this is Scott with Spectre Gear, and for today's video, we're back talking once again about revolvers. And what we're going to be doing today is this is the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing talking about applying the shooting fundamentals towards mastering the double action trigger on your revolver. Now, when it comes to what I'm going to be talking about, and specifically when I get to talking about the shooting fundamentals, for new shooters, hopefully this is new information and you'll be able to get some very important information at an early stage, which is important towards your development as a shooter. But for shooters that have been around for a bit, I start talking about the fundamentals. They immediately tune out, especially if they're interested in defensive use of the revolver. And I'm going to tell you, if you're doing that and you've been doing that throughout your shooting career, you've been doing yourself a huge disservice. Because when it comes to the fundamental shooting skills, and when I say fundamental shooting skills, I'm talking about those 5 skills that are defined as stance, grip, sight picture, trigger control, and follow through. Those 5 things. Those are 5 things that have to occur every single time you press a trigger, whether you're trying to deliver a 50-yard 10-ring shot in a paper competition, or whether you're dealing with somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning coming up fast behind you with a knife at an ATM. Those same fundamentals apply. It's just they're applied differently and with a bit more urgency and haste, and there's also compromise points that I'll identify later. But everything starts with the shooting fundamentals, because if you don't have true mastery of your handgun, in other words, if you can't operate the controls on the weapon without having to think about it, if you can't run the trigger without having to think about it, if you can't line up the sights without having to consciously think about it, you're going to have a problem, because none of those things are going to come into play for you. The fundamental skills are something that you don't necessarily, even though I said you get those 5 skills, you don't run down a 1 through 5 checklist before you press a trigger every time. These are things that you burn in through dry practice and live fire practice. And you burn them in so that they become part of your muscle memory, and they become an instinctive response, a learned response, a programmed response. If you don't have that programmed response, you're going to have gaps in your shooting response. And I see this, and this is why whenever I would teach a defensive firearms class, if it was on the tactical level, the first thing that we would do is we would take all the guns out, get on the line, and we would very slowly and very methodically do precision shots on paper at fairly close ranges. And the reason for this is I needed to see what holes some of the students had in their shooting skills, because it is possible to progress pretty far into shooting without having learned these 5 fundamental skills. Now, sometimes you intuitively pick them up. Sometimes you get a nugget here and there, but if they haven't been presented to you as a package deal, and you didn't start with that as the foundation of your shooting skills, like I said, you're going to have weak points popping up. If you haven't been taught a proper stance, or know that when it comes to stance is no stance, and I am going to cover stance, but I'm going to cover that in a completely separate range video. But the remaining 4 fundamentals of grip, sight picture, trigger control, and follow through, those are going to come into play each and every time you press the trigger. And if you've never been taught a proper grip, or you have a problem with your grip, you're going to have a problem with your shots on target. If your sight alignment, if you don't stress sight alignment, or rather sight picture strongly enough, if you're not programmed in to catch that front sight and focus intently on that front sight, no matter what speed you're shooting at, you're going to have a problem. If you don't know a proper trigger control, so if you're cycling the trigger incorrectly, if you're jerking the trigger, if you're anticipating a shot, and related directly and married to that is follow through, and you're not following through on the shot, you're doing something to disturb the aim before the bullet has even left the barrel, all of these things are things that will start to come up. Now, there are things that I will backfill and I'll cover with each of the students, or I would back in the day. But these are all important, and these are things you want to burn in early and make sure that they're a part of your core shooting foundational skills. That's why they're called the 5 fundamental shooting skills. And that truly is, those 5 skills are the secret to good shooting. Perfect execution of the fundamentals at any speed is what defines an excellent shooter. And if you think I'm just talking out of my ass on this one, I guarantee you, if you look around, if you do enough studying, if you talk to the right people, you'll find that regardless of the level at which people are shooting, and I'll throw an example out for you. If we're going to talk maybe perhaps the preeminent gunfighters on the planet right at the moment. We would probably think in terms of what's colloquially called the Delta Force, also called Combat Applications Group, Special Applications. There's all different kinds of names for them. They periodically cycle the names. But it's the first Special Operations Detachment Delta. They're a Tier 1 unit. So I have no affiliation with those guys. I was in the Air Force. But I've talked to some of those guys, and I've examined their shooting program to see what they do. When I was putting together a shooting program for my own team, I looked at what everyone was doing, not just what cops were doing, but I looked at what other units were doing. And I trained with Navy SEAL team members. I trained with LAPD SWAT. I trained with Marine Corps Force Recon. I trained with different tactical teams all over the state of California. And I looked at their program, and the first thing I wanted to know is, where do you start and what do you start with? And here's what they all start with. So let's go back to Delta as the example. So you pass selection and you go to your operator training course where you start shooting, and you develop, back in the old day they call it 1911 thumb. They would develop this massive callus on their thumb where it would ride the safety on their 1911. But they would shoot literally thousands of rounds every single day. And they didn't do it willy-nilly, and they didn't do it just for the purpose of ballistic masturbation. They did it for a very intent purpose. And what they started out with was basic, fundamental marksmanship skills. Regardless of what unit they came from, they may have come from a Special Forces unit, a Ranger unit, something like that. If they were going into Delta, they started with a basic marksmanship course, and they worked up from there. They started from square one. And that's important because they wanted to make sure that every one of their shooters had the same fundamental skill set before they moved forward. And again, those fundamentals, your ability to operate the controls on your weapon, your ability to operate that trigger without thinking about it, and your ability to apply the fundamental shooting skills to that trigger press for each and every shot is critical before you can apply any kind of speed. If you have that down and you've mastered it, and you have the ability under slow fire conditions, let's say 10 yards, you can cloverleaf the center of your target. What that means is all 6 shots from your revolver are essentially touching in a cloverleaf. If you're able to do that under no time constraints, but you can do that, then you start applying slow time constraints. And if you can do that under a very reasonable time constraint, like 6 rounds, 30 seconds, that's not that bad. That's basically 5 seconds per round to set up your shot. If you can still cloverleaf, then you say, let's go 6 rounds, 25 seconds. Let's go 6 rounds, 20 seconds. Let's go 6 rounds, 12 seconds. Let's go 6 rounds, 10 seconds. And what will happen is each and every time you apply speed, that tight precision group will open up, but it will only open up a bit. Now, if you start out with the inability to cloverleaf those shots, and let's say under no time constraints, your 6 shots are covered with the span of your hand. So you've got a group this big at 10 yards, no time limit. The second I tell you it's going to be 12 rounds, 30 seconds, they're going to open up to that much. And then if I get you down to about 12 seconds, you're not going to be even on the target for half of those shots. And if you don't believe that, I've seen that occur. I used to see that occur every single time I taught a basic firearms class for the College of Sequoias. It's frustrating, and I had a limited amount of time to impart the skills that I had to impart upon the shooters that I was teaching. We were only talking like a 3-day firearms class, and I think we only had 400 rounds to expend in that time. So we did a lot of dry practice. We did a whole day before we even hit the range. We did a whole day of supervised dry practice, building those fundamentals so that I could at least get them on paper, be nice and early, and they had a little bit of a foundation to build off of. But again, the importance of the 5 fundamental shooting skills are critical. So each video in this series is going to address the stance video. Like I said, that's going to be a range video, and I got some esoteric stuff to delve into there. But talking about those 4 fundamentals of grip, sight picture, trigger control, and follow through, that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about in the next 3 videos covering this topic. So with that, I'll go ahead and cut at this point. I've already said enough, and we'll start off talking about where it all starts, and that's going to be at the grip. So with that, we'll break at this point, and the next video will follow shortly after this. But if you want to support my activities here, by all means, please visit us at spectergear.com and have a look at our products. We've got a few decent speed loader pouch selections for revolvers and more stuff for revolvers coming. So with that, thank you for watching and or listening. Have a wonderful day.